She almost didn't go. The invitation had been sitting on her phone for 2 days, unread at first, then ignored, then finally opened late at night when the house was quiet. It was for a community event organized by a local group, part networking, part family gathering. She had signed up weeks ago, thinking it might help her find better work or at least feel less alone. But now, as the day came closer, doubt crept in. She was a single mother, and life had taught her to think twice before walking into places where people smiled politely but judged silently. She knew the looks, the questions asked with kind voices but sharp meaning. She knew how quickly people made stories about her life without knowing anything real. Still, she went. That morning, she dressed carefully, choosing clothes that were clean and simple. Nothing fancy. Nothing that would draw attention. She tied her hair back, checked her reflection once, then turned away. Her child was staying with a neighbor for a few hours, and the thought alone made her anxious. Every step outside the house felt like borrowed time. The event was held in a large hall connected to a community center. Tables were set in rows, chairs placed neatly around them. People stood in small groups, laughing, talking loudly, greeting each other like old friends. She noticed right away that most of them seemed comfortable, confident, like they belonged. She didn't. She signed in quietly and looked for an empty seat near the back. Sitting alone felt safer. No pressure to talk. No awkward questions. Just sit, listen, leave. At another table, a group of coworkers from a local company had already gathered. They were joking, teasing one another, clearly enjoying themselves. Among them was a single father who had arrived alone. He sat slightly apart, scrolling through his phone, calm and unbothered. He looked ordinary in every way, simple clothes, relaxed posture, no sign of importance. People didn't pay him much attention. Someone in the group noticed the woman sitting alone and smirked. Another glanced at the single father and laughed under their breath. A joke was whispered. Then another. Soon the idea took shape. "Why don't we seat them together?" someone said, not trying very hard to hide the humor in their voice. Another laughed. "Yeah, they're both single. Might be interesting." The tone wasn't cruel, but it wasn't kind either. It was careless, like moving pieces on a board just to see what would happen. One of the organizers overheard and, without knowing the intent, agreed it made sense. Extra seats were needed. Space had to be managed. The woman was approached and politely asked to move closer to the front. She hesitated. Her hands tightened around her bag. But saying no felt rude, and she didn't want attention. So she nodded. The man stood up at the same time, equally surprised. He glanced around, then shrugged slightly, as if it didn't matter. They ended up sitting side by side. For a moment, neither spoke. She stared at the table, pretending to read a printed schedule she didn't care about. Her heart beat faster than it should have. She hated being put on the spot, especially as part of someone else's joke. He noticed her discomfort. "You don't have to talk if you don't want to," he said softly, not looking at her directly. "These things can feel awkward." She looked at him, surprised.
His voice was calm.
No humor. No judgment. "Thanks," she said. "I'm not very good at events like this."
"Me neither," he replied.
"I usually come, sit, and leave quietly." That made her smile a little. Around them, a few people watched, waiting for something funny to happen. An awkward silence. A bad interaction. But instead, there was nothing dramatic at all. The program began. A speaker walked to the front and started talking about community growth and shared effort. Words filled the room, but most people half listened. The woman shifted in her chair, adjusting her bag at her feet. He noticed. "Do you have kids?" he asked gently. She nodded. "One."
"Same," he said.
"That alone changes how you see everything." She looked at him again, this time with interest. "It really does." They spoke quietly between announcements and applause. Nothing deep at first, just small truths. Sleepless nights. School fees. Trying to be two parents at once. She found herself opening up without meaning to. Not about everything, but enough. About how tired she felt most days. About how people assumed she had failed in life. He listened. Truly listened. He didn't interrupt. Didn't offer advice she didn't ask for. I get that, he said at one point. People see one part of your life and decide that's the whole story. She felt something loosen inside her chest. Behind them, someone whispered, disappointed. This is boring. They had expected something else. As time passed, the woman forgot she was part of a joke. For the first time in a long while, she felt normal. Not watched. Not measured. The man didn't talk much about himself. When she asked what he did for work, he gave a simple answer. Nothing impressive. Nothing detailed. He changed the subject easily. Yet there was something about him that didn't match the simplicity of his words. The way he sat. The way he spoke. The way he reacted when others nearby raised their voices or showed off. At one point, someone approached their table and greeted him respectfully, using a tone that suggested familiarity and respect. It was brief, but noticeable. The woman noticed. When the person walked away, she asked casually, "Do you know a lot of people here?" He smiled faintly. "A few." That was all. The event paused for a short break. People stood, stretched, grabbed drinks. Conversations grew louder. She stayed seated, unsure whether to leave or stay. He remained too. "You okay?" he asked. "Yeah," she said. "Just thinking about my kid." He nodded. "I do that all the time." Across the room, the group who had joked earlier watched again. Their smiles had faded into confusion. This wasn't what they expected. There was no embarrassment. No awkwardness. Instead, there was quiet connection. One of them leaned over to another and whispered, "Who is that guy anyway?" "I thought he was just nobody special," the other replied. The man checked his phone, then put it away without reading the message. His face showed no stress. No rush. The woman noticed that too. She didn't know it yet, but that small detail, the ignored message, would matter later. As the break ended and people returned to their seats, the room settled again. The joke that started the seating arrangement was already forgotten by most. But its effect had just begun. She looked at him once more, feeling unexpectedly grateful that she hadn't stayed home. He looked ahead, calm as ever, unaware that the quiet space around him was about to fill with questions no one had planned to ask. And somewhere between polite laughter and careless assumptions, the truth waited, patient, silent, and ready to change everything. The event continued, and the room seemed to blur into background noise. The woman found herself paying less attention to the crowd and more to the quiet man beside her. She realized that in the brief time they had shared, he had already said things that felt honest, simple, and thoughtful. Not the kind of polite words people throw around to appear nice, but words that carried meaning without effort. She shifted slightly in her chair, feeling her nervousness ease. She had not expected to find a conversation so calm and genuine in a place like this. Usually, she found herself pretending, guarding small parts of her life to avoid judgment. But here, she felt she could breathe. He noticed her subtle relaxation. "You seem calmer now," he said quietly, not looking at her directly. His voice was soft, almost careful, like he did not want to disturb the space around them. She laughed a little, a sound she rarely made outside her home. "I guess I am. It's strange. I thought these things were supposed to be stressful." "They usually are," he admitted. "I just try not to let them be." They talked in small increments between the speakers' points and brief applause. At first, it was casual, topics like the weather, the community, and light work chatter. But gradually, the conversation turned more personal, though never intrusive. She shared little glimpses of her daily life, of early mornings and late nights, of trying to balance responsibilities that often felt overwhelming. He listened, truly listening, responding with empathy, not pity. "You make it sound manageable," she said, half smiling, half amazed. "I don't mean it to sound easy," he replied. "I just try to find the small things that make it bearable. Little victories. Even if they seem minor to others."
She thought about that.
She often overlooked her own small victories. The laundry folded, the homework finished, the quiet moments where her child smiled genuinely at her. He was right. These moments mattered, even if they went unnoticed. The conversation moved naturally, without forced questions or awkward pauses. He asked about her child's favorite activities, school, and friends. She asked about his, though he gave careful, simple answers, hinting at a child or children but not revealing too much yet. There was a subtle rhythm to their exchange, like two dancers learning each other's steps without music. Occasionally, someone from the group nearby glanced their way, expecting something unusual to happen, some awkwardness or discomfort. But nothing did. The mother and father simply shared ordinary moments of understanding, and it was powerful in its quietness. At one point, the man noticed her fidgeting with the strap of her bag. "Nervous?" he asked softly. "A little," she admitted. "I'm not used to being in places like this, and I never expected to sit next to anyone like you." "Like me?" he asked, a small smile forming.
"Yes," she said.
"You seemed grounded."
"Calm."
"Not trying to impress anyone." "It's rare." He shrugged lightly. "I've found it's easier to focus on what matters than on what people think." That thought lingered with her. People spent so much energy worrying about appearances, about being liked, about showing off. Here was someone who did not need to impress, yet somehow carried respect naturally. She felt a strange mix of relief and curiosity. As the event moved forward, the speakers shared stories of local people making a difference in the community. Some tales were inspiring, some heart-wrenching. She found herself thinking about her own life, her struggles, and the quiet victories she often overlooked. He seemed to notice her reflection without judgment. "You think about things too deeply sometimes," he said casually, almost as if reading her mind. "Maybe," she replied. "Or maybe I just notice the details most people ignore." He nodded, and they shared a brief silence, both looking at the stage without really seeing it. Sometimes words were not needed. Understanding could exist in shared, quiet moments. During a short break, people moved around the room, chatting and laughing. Some grabbed snacks, others pulled out phones, capturing moments to post later. She stayed seated, reluctant to step away from the conversation that felt unexpectedly comforting. He remained beside her, adjusting his own bag, relaxed and unhurried. "You don't mingle much," she observed quietly. "Not really," he admitted. "I prefer observing, listening. You learn more that way." She smiled, recognizing the truth in that. Most people spent events trying to be noticed, speaking louder than necessary, performing for attention. Yet here was someone who seemed invisible yet present, unnoticed yet important in the way he carried himself. They spoke about everyday routines next, simple things like grocery shopping, school drop-offs, balancing work and family. She found herself laughing more easily, sharing small anecdotes she would normally keep to herself. He responded with his own stories, modest and unpretentious, hinting at life experiences that suggested depth without boasting. "She doesn't usually smile this much at gatherings," he thought silently, noticing her relaxed expression. Somewhere across the room, the group who had seated them together whispered again. "They're actually talking calmly. Not what we expected." "Yeah, and she seems comfortable," another replied, curiosity mixed with disbelief. The mother noticed the whispers, but chose to ignore them. She was too absorbed in the ease of conversation beside her. For once, the noise of others faded into the background, irrelevant to the moment. As the session continued, the man occasionally offered small gestures of thoughtfulness, a napkin, a quiet word, a shared observation that made her laugh. Each gesture was simple, but they carried weight. In a world often loud and performative, his simplicity felt grounding. At one point, she hesitated before sharing a personal worry. He waited patiently, giving her space to explain. When she finished, he said, "I understand. I've been there in my own way." She looked at him, surprised. She had not expected empathy, only polite acknowledgement. Yet he gave her both. "You make it sound manageable again," she said, smiling softly. "That's because it is," he replied. "Even when it feels hard, you can find ways to make it manageable. You're stronger than you think." His words were gentle, but they carried truth. She felt a flicker of hope she hadn't felt in years, a rare moment of reassurance that she wasn't failing, not completely, not in ways that mattered. The event began to wind down. People were exchanging numbers, talking in circles, making plans. She felt the weight of re-entering the noisy world outside the calm bubble beside him. Yet the moment had shifted something within her. Before leaving, he glanced at her and said, "It was nice sitting with you. Really nice." "Yeah," she replied, almost surprised at how natural it felt to say it.
It was.
As they parted to return to their separate worlds for the evening, she couldn't shake the feeling that this small, quiet encounter had mattered more than she expected. The conversation, the shared understanding, the simple respect, it was rare, and it left an imprint. The group who had orchestrated the seating watched silently. Their laughter had disappeared, replaced by curiosity and a hint of unease. This wasn't the joke they thought it would be. Something about the man had shifted their perception, even if they didn't yet understand why. She walked away, thinking about the calm presence she had sat beside. She felt lighter, more seen, and oddly optimistic. For the first time in a long time, she thought maybe life had room for unexpected moments, and maybe, just maybe, people weren't always what they seemed. And somewhere, quietly, he returned to his own world, unaware of the effect he had made. The ordinary moment, the ordinary man, and the ordinary woman, nothing in appearance, yet everything in essence, had created a connection that would ripple far beyond the room, far beyond the brief event that had brought them together. After the event ended, people slowly filed out of the hall. The chatter, laughter, and occasional applause faded into the evening air. She gathered her belongings, feeling lighter than she had in weeks. Sitting beside him had been unexpectedly comforting. It was not only his calm presence, but the simple honesty in the way he listened that made her feel understood. As she was about to leave, someone from the nearby group approached them. A woman, older, with a professional demeanor, greeted the man warmly, calling his name politely but with clear respect. Her tone suggested familiarity, but not casual friendship. It was a formal acknowledgement of someone important. The woman beside him noticed immediately. She glanced at him, surprised, trying to figure out why someone would speak to him in such a manner. He responded politely, modestly, almost as if it was nothing unusual, and then returned his attention to her. "Do you know them?" she asked quietly, curious but careful. He shook his head slightly. "Not really. Just a brief acquaintance." That answer didn't quite satisfy her, but she didn't press. There was something different about him, something she couldn't put her finger on. His modesty, the way he seemed ordinary yet drew respect naturally, it was a strange combination. They stepped outside together. The evening air was cool, and the city sounds of distant traffic and chatter created a calm backdrop. She noticed the ease in the way he walked, a quiet confidence that didn't need attention. "So, do you always get this kind of respect from people?" she asked, trying to sound casual, but her curiosity was clear. He smiled faintly. "Not really. Sometimes people notice, sometimes they don't. I try not to let it matter."
She considered that.
In her world, respect was often a struggle, earned through constant effort. She found it strange yet comforting that for him, it seemed natural, almost effortless. They talked on the walk back to the parking lot. Small things at first, weather, traffic, evening routines. Then, gradually, she felt comfortable enough to share more about her life. About the challenges of being a single parent, the struggles she faced daily, and the exhaustion that never seemed to end. He listened patiently, never interrupting, never judging. "I imagine it's not easy," he said softly, "but you handle it with more strength than you probably realize." She looked at him, slightly surprised. His words weren't empty compliments, they carried understanding. For once, she didn't feel like she was being pitted or measured. During a pause in their conversation, someone in the parking lot approached him. It was a man, slightly older, who greeted him formally and handed him a folder, speaking in a tone that indicated importance. She noticed the exchange, subtle yet unmistakable. The man beside her accepted the folder, nodded politely, and the other person walked away, leaving them alone again. She couldn't hide her curiosity anymore. "You seem to know a lot of people," she said carefully. "More than I thought." He smiled faintly. I know some people. Enough to handle what I need. But it's nothing fancy. She frowned slightly, sensing that he was hiding more. Not in a negative way, but in a manner that suggested humility. There was depth behind his calm exterior, and she could feel it. As they reached the edge of the parking lot, she stopped, unsure whether to say goodbye or continue the conversation. She had grown strangely comfortable in his presence, and the thought of walking away felt heavier than she expected. You seem different from everyone else, she said quietly. Not better, just different. He glanced at her, the faintest smile touching his lips. I try to be myself. That's all anyone can do, right? They shared a brief silence, filled only with the distant hum of cars and faint conversations from people leaving the event. It was a quiet moment, simple yet meaningful. As she prepared to leave, her phone buzzed. She glanced at the screen, checking messages from her child's caregiver. She felt the pull of responsibility and the real world pressing back in. Yet, she hesitated before walking away. He noticed. It's okay, he said softly. You don't have to rush. I understand. His understanding wasn't just polite, it was real. It felt like someone recognized the weight she carried and offered space to breathe. On the way home, she kept thinking about the small details, the way he listened, the subtle respect people gave him without needing to be loud, the quiet confidence that seemed to follow him. She realized that this was different from any encounter she had had in years. It was genuine, unforced, and oddly inspiring. Meanwhile, he returned to his own life, handling his evening tasks with calm efficiency. The folder he had received earlier lay on the table as he prepared dinner. He didn't dwell on it, but she had noticed the interaction. It wasn't flashy, but it carried significance. She hadn't realized yet just how different he really was. The next day at work, she replayed the previous evening in her mind. The simple conversations, the calmness, the ease of being understood. All of it lingered. She shared a small part with a colleague, not revealing names, only mentioning the presence of someone kind and respectful. The colleague raised an eyebrow, curious, sensing the intrigue. Later that week, she returned to her routines, work, school drop-offs, household tasks, but she carried a small spark of optimism. The encounter had reminded her that genuine connection existed, even in unexpected places. Days passed, and subtle signs of his unusual presence began to surface. She overheard snippets from mutual acquaintances, a mention of his business ventures, a reference to previous achievements, whispers that hinted at influence or authority. She tried to dismiss them at first, thinking it was exaggeration, but pieces started to fit together. The quiet man she had sat beside wasn't just ordinary. There was more beneath the surface, more than appearances suggested. One evening, she asked him about it casually when they crossed paths at another small community gathering. He deflected politely, giving modest, vague answers that hinted at experience and influence without revealing specifics. Yet, his humility and composure never wavered. You don't need to impress anyone, she said, observing the way others treated him with respect without his trying. They seemed to notice, even if you don't show it. He nodded, accepting the observation without pride. It's not important. What matters is being honest and doing what you can. She understood, but she also sensed that there was a story waiting to be uncovered, a depth that would eventually reveal itself. The ordinary exterior, the calm demeanor, and the quiet confidence all hinted at something remarkable. She didn't yet know the full story, but the first pieces were beginning to form. The following days, small moments reminded her of the connection they had shared. A text message of thanks for listening, a brief shared glance across a room, a casual conversation about children and daily struggles. Each interaction was ordinary on the surface, but carried the weight of sincerity beneath. The people who had once joked about seating them together began to notice the subtle change. Their laughter and teasing had faded, replaced by curiosity and a quiet admiration. The man's influence was not overt, but it was there, in the way he carried himself, in the respect he commanded naturally. The woman realized that what had started as a joke had become something far more meaningful. It was not about humor or awkwardness anymore. It was about connection, understanding, and the slow unveiling of a life that was richer than appearances suggested. And somewhere, quietly, he continued his own path. Unaware of the growing intrigue, he lived with the same calm, deliberate approach. His ordinary actions held extraordinary significance, waiting for the right moment to be recognized fully. She, like many others, had only glimpsed the beginning of a story that would gradually reveal the depth, humility, and quiet power of the man she had met by chance. The ordinary encounter had planted seeds that would slowly bloom, changing the way they both saw themselves and the world around them. A week later, another community gathering was held, this one smaller and less formal. People moved around in circles, some chatting, some observing quietly, sipping drinks or grabbing snacks. She arrived early, hoping to get a head start on her responsibilities and to avoid the rush of people she usually found overwhelming. He was already there, standing near the entrance, casually greeting a few familiar faces. When he saw her, he gave a small nod, a gesture that was subtle but comforting. She smiled in return, walking toward him with a mix of curiosity and familiarity. Their previous interactions had been quiet but impactful, leaving her with a sense of connection she hadn't expected. The moment she joined him, someone from across the room approached. It was a man, clearly professional, wearing a crisp suit and carrying an important-looking folder. He stopped beside the man she had been speaking with and spoke to him in a tone that was formal yet respectful. The conversation was brief, but the woman noticed the careful attention, the acknowledgement of importance. The man accepted the folder and thanked him politely, his demeanor calm and modest despite the weight of the interaction. Her curiosity could no longer be contained. "You seem to know a lot of people who treat you seriously," she said quietly. He looked at her, meeting her gaze for the first time with a hint of a smile. "I suppose some people know me better than you might think. But it's nothing I want to make a big deal about." She sensed there was more beneath his modesty. Something significant, hidden behind his calm, ordinary exterior. Yet he didn't push her for questions or explanations. He simply returned to the conversation they had started, talking about children, responsibilities, and the small victories that made daily life bearable. During a group discussion nearby, someone mentioned a recent business success, and she realized that the man beside her seemed unusually familiar with the topic. He didn't boast, didn't correct anyone, but his knowledge was apparent, and the group's subtle deference to him became more noticeable. He had the air of someone whose actions spoke louder than words. She asked quietly, "Do people often underestimate you?" He nodded. "Often. It's easier that way. People reveal their true selves when they think you're ordinary." That made her pause. She realized that this was exactly what had happened the first time they met. Everyone expected awkwardness or entertainment from them, but instead, there was quiet understanding, and she had been allowed to be herself. Now, pieces of the puzzle were fitting together. Throughout the evening, small details began to surface. Others approached him with subtle respect, seeking advice or sharing information he didn't need to respond to immediately. He handled each interaction with humility and calm, never flaunting authority or status. She watched closely, trying to reconcile the man she had met with the presence he seemed to command in these interactions. At one point, she asked, "Do you usually attend these gatherings?" He shook his head slightly. "Not really. I come when it's necessary or meaningful. I prefer meaningful moments over appearances." She thought about that. He had no desire to impress anyone, yet people naturally treated him differently. It was the kind of quiet influence that didn't demand attention, but commanded it nonetheless. She felt both admiration and intrigue, realizing that there was much more to this man than she had first assumed. As the evening progressed, their conversation returned to lighter topics, shared experiences with their children, daily routines, and moments of small joy. Yet underneath, there was a growing awareness on her part of the depth and complexity he carried. The ordinary man she had been seated beside as part of a joke was revealing himself slowly, carefully, in ways that made her reconsider her initial assumptions. During a lull in the gathering, someone from the group that had originally joked about seating them together approached them. The person looked surprised, almost hesitant. "I didn't realize," they began, trailing off. Yes, she prompted gently. They glanced at the man beside her, as if searching for confirmation, then shook their head. Nothing. I didn't realize you were like this. He offered a small smile. Sometimes people surprise you, he said simply. The person nodded, quiet now, clearly reflecting on their own assumptions. It was the first time she saw others begin to recognize that their joke had underestimated something real, something meaningful. As the gathering wound down, the woman and the man found a quiet corner to speak privately. The room was still filled with people, but their little space felt calm, separate from the noise and chatter. You didn't have to tell me anything, she said softly. But I can sense there's a lot more to your life than what you let on. He considered her words, then nodded.
Yes, there's more.
But it's not important to everyone. What matters is how we live and what we do, not the recognition we receive.
She reflected on that.
In her life, recognition had been a rare and often complicated thing. Here was someone whose impact was quiet yet undeniable. She felt both humbled and inspired. As they prepared to leave, a small group of people waved or nodded in their direction. She noticed the difference in tone, the respect that had not been there before. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but unmistakable to someone paying attention. The man simply nodded back, his humility intact, unaffected by the acknowledgement. Walking to the exit, she asked, "Does it ever feel strange? That people notice things you don't really advertise?" He looked ahead thoughtfully. Sometimes. But it's a reminder that actions speak louder than words. You never know the impact you have until later. She considered that, realizing how much their brief encounter a week ago had already impacted her. She had been cautious, weary, and slightly defensive, yet he had allowed her to be herself without judgment. And now, she was beginning to see the broader picture, the quiet influence he carried, the respect he inspired without demanding it. Outside, the evening was calm, the air cool and gentle. She took a deep breath, feeling a sense of clarity she hadn't experienced in a long time. The joke that had brought them together had long since faded, replaced by something real, meaningful, and quietly profound. As she walked to her car, she realized that assumptions were dangerous, that humility often hid extraordinary depth, and that true character revealed itself not in what people said about themselves, but in the way they lived and interacted with others. The man returned to his own path, modest and steady, unaware of how much he had shifted the perceptions around him. His ordinary demeanor masked extraordinary presence, and the woman had glimpsed only the beginning of what he truly represented. Others around them were slowly starting to notice as well, but she understood something crucial. It was never about appearances, status, or recognition. It was about authenticity, respect, and the quiet power of being genuine. And, in that moment, she felt fortunate. Fortunate to have shared a seat beside someone who had unknowingly taught her a lesson she would carry for the rest of her life. What had started as a joke had become a turning point, revealing depth, humility, and strength that no one could ignore, even if they tried. Weeks passed after the community gatherings, but the encounter remained vivid in her mind. The initial joke that had placed her beside him seemed like a distant memory, almost insignificant compared to the connection that had grown between them. She had continued her routines, work, childcare, household responsibilities, but now, her perspective had shifted. She noticed small details in her day, small moments of strength she hadn't acknowledged before. The calm presence of the man she had met had quietly left its mark. They began to meet occasionally at other community events, though never in orchestrated situations. Each encounter felt natural, unforced, and slowly, she realized that their conversations had become a source of comfort. Not because he solved her problems, but because he listened, understood, and offered perspective without judgment. During one such meeting, someone approached him with a professional question. The exchange was polite, brief, and full of respect. She noticed how effortlessly people treated him seriously without his demanding attention. It was natural, almost invisible, yet unmistakably present. She realized this was part of the quiet strength he carried, authority without arrogance, Influence without show. Curiosity she had been holding for weeks finally overcame her hesitation. "I still don't understand," she said quietly as they walked together in a small park after an event. "You seem ordinary in every way, but everyone treats you like you're someone extraordinary."
How?
He looked at her, a thoughtful expression crossing his face. "I've learned a long time ago that what people see is only a part of who you are. Most assume things without knowing. That's fine. What matters is being consistent with your values and treating people respectfully. That has more impact than showing off anything else."
She thought about that.
It made sense, yet it was rare to see it in practice. People usually demanded attention or recognition, but he had quietly earned respect by simply being himself. She felt a new kind of admiration, not for what he did, but for how he carried himself and lived authentically. In the weeks that followed, the mother and father shared small, meaningful moments. Sometimes it was a brief chat about their children, other times it was an exchange of encouragement about daily challenges. Each interaction was simple, yet it carried weight. She noticed herself smiling more, feeling lighter, and approaching life with a little more confidence. He didn't fix her problems, but he gave her a sense of reassurance that life could be navigated with quiet strength. One afternoon, she confided in him about a recent difficulty, balancing work and childcare when unexpected issues arose. She felt exhausted and overwhelmed. He listened without interruption, nodding with understanding. "You're handling more than most people realize," he said gently. "It's okay to acknowledge that. You're doing well." His words, simple as they were, stayed with her. They were not dramatic or exaggerated, but honest and validating. She realized that in a world filled with judgment and noise, finding someone who simply understood without critique was rare and valuable. Meanwhile, people around them slowly began to notice the subtle changes. The group who had once joked about seating them together began to observe their interactions differently. They saw that the connection between the two was genuine, based on respect and understanding rather than appearances or humor. The man's influence became evident in quiet ways. People deferred to him naturally, his words carried weight without show, and his actions reflected integrity. Yet he remained humble, never using his position to overshadow others. The mother found herself reflecting on the impact of that first encounter. What had begun as a joke had grown into something meaningful. She felt seen, respected, and understood in a way she hadn't experienced in years. She realized that her assumptions about people and about herself had been challenged. She had underestimated her own strength, and he had defied expectations quietly, without fanfare. One evening, after a small community meeting, they walked together toward the exit. The conversation was light, filled with small jokes and shared observations about the day. Yet beneath the surface, there was a shared understanding, a mutual respect and acknowledgement of each other's experiences. "Do you ever regret how that first seating happened?" she asked, a smile on her face. He chuckled softly. "Not at all. Sometimes, small accidents lead to meaningful connections. What started as a joke turned into something important." She nodded, thinking about how true that was. Life often worked in unexpected ways. What seemed ordinary or even trivial at first could evolve into something deeply impactful. As they parted for the evening, she felt a sense of gratitude and reflection. She understood now that true connection wasn't about wealth, status, or appearances. It was about honesty, understanding, and shared experiences. The man had shown her that quietly, consistently, and without expectation. Weeks turned into months, and their paths continued to cross naturally. Sometimes they exchanged advice, sometimes laughter, sometimes simply shared a moment of silence that was comfortable rather than awkward. She noticed changes in herself, more confidence, more patience, a deeper sense of value in small victories. He, too, remained consistent, his humility intact, unaffected by the respect he earned or the influence he held. One afternoon, she reflected on the journey. The initial joke, the unexpected seating arrangement, the quiet conversations, they had all led to a broader understanding of life. She realized that assumptions could blind people, humility could hide strength, and genuine character always revealed itself eventually. And in that realization, she felt empowered. She had seen someone living authentically, quietly making a difference, and she had been allowed to witness it without pretense or expectation. That experience had changed her, not in dramatic ways, but in subtle, enduring ways that affected her perspective on life, people, and herself. The man continued his path, ordinary in appearance, but extraordinary in essence. People noticed it gradually, naturally, without fanfare. And she knew that what mattered most was not the recognition, but the authenticity and integrity that guided his life. She carried that lesson with her, a reminder that true worth is revealed through actions, humility, and the quiet impact we have on others. In the end, what had started as a joke, a seating arrangement meant for humor, had transformed into a profound lesson about life, respect, and human connection. The single mother and single father, ordinary by appearance, had shared moments that were extraordinary in meaning. They had influenced each other and those around them without intention, teaching lessons in authenticity, patience, and understanding. And though life continued, with its challenges, routines, and responsibilities, she walked forward with a sense of strength, knowing that genuine connection and quiet wisdom were more valuable than appearances or assumptions. She had learned to see people, and herself, differently with respect, insight, and hope. The story that began with a joke had ended in a lesson that would stay with her forever, quietly shaping her life in ways she would carry for the years to come.